Hey there guys, and welcome back, and it's time for a special project. So, well, a reasonably special project, and it's special only because this thing over here, which I'm keeping out of screen just for a minute, I intended to spend all of like an hour on, and I didn't even intend to print much of anything, just a couple connecting pieces, and then I was just going to hack some stuff out of some other stuff and make it work. And it's one of these things, this project is getting its own video instead of, me just mentioning that I did it, because frankly, I ended up doing more with it than I expected. And frankly, it should have been a video on this channel, designing it, but I underestimated how much work I was going to do on it, and here we are. So, what is it? What do we got here? What do we got here? Just off screen. It's a fume extractor. I honestly was planning on just taking this 140mm fan that I have sitting around, slapping a computer grill on it, just hacked out of a case that I have sitting around. Well, not sitting around here, but we have a few cases at work that are just sitting around from very old computers. And then through bolting on some of the carbon filter. That was the plan for this, and obviously, as you can see, I have a fully 3D printed device at this point. So basically what happened is, point number one, the 140mm fan does not fit into any of the old cases that we have sitting around work. So I couldn't just chop the grill out of it, and I wasn't about to buy a grill off of online, So that's where we ended up with, how we ended up with a printed, at least, grill. And then once I started printing the grill, then I decided go whole hog and print the carbon filter as well. And this project ended up being pretty interesting because of how I ended up deciding to print it. It's one of those things where, in theory, even at this point, even at the point where I said, okay, whatever, I'll just print a grill, my idea was still that I was going to through bolt this and just through bolt the carbon filter to it. It wasn't until I started thinking about this idea of having this cartridge to hold the carbon filter that things didn't started getting a little bit difficult and a little bit complicated. So it's one of those things, if it was just the carbon filter and the grill bolted onto the fume extractor, then it's a matter of this just gets printed like this, no big deal. But as soon as you got the cartridge in here, rather, well, now all of a sudden the cartridge needs to be printed separate. How are you going to print the cartridge? Spoiler, I did not come up with a terribly good way to print the cartridge, but that is beyond the point. And then on the inside here, obviously the cartridge can't just kind of flop around, so you need some features on the inside in order to make sure that the cartridge is not flopping around, and you need support for this features. So that is where we ended up. So as you can see, this ended up as a 3-part device: front part, back part, and cartridge. Technically speaking, I also have this little locking mechanism right here. This is just a slide. Frankly, with as tight as the cartridge is in right now, and it's tight because, frankly, I don't print in PLA, and this is printed in PLA because I wanted some exotic colors. PLA is the material I have exotic colors in, so one of those things. That's how we ended up as PLA. So because it's a PLA profile, I do not have my PLA profiles tuned at all. So the cartridge is pretty tight in here, and this locking mechanism is rather unnecessary. This will not fall out. It won't even budge if I, turn it around, throw it in the car, whatever. So one of those things. Locking mechanism was a bit unnecessary for me specifically, but in theory, if this cartridge is loose because of however you print it, that's another thing. Obviously, this handle right here, you can see it's a bit of an odd shape. And by an odd shape, I mean it's a reasonable shape. I like the shape. It's just a matter of you're going to have a hard time no matter what orientation printing this, right? Well, short of printing this up and down, we'll get to that. I'll talk about that when we get to talking about the CAD. So I printed this as a second piece, glued this on top of the cartridge. The cartridge itself here is open on the bottom, closed at the top. So you slide the carbon filter in through the bottom, and then once it's inside the case, obviously the carbon filter can't slip out the bottom. It's not going to slip out the top because the top's solid, so it's secure in there. And otherwise, everything else is as you see it. So we'll go ahead now, and actually, you know what, I guess I may as well do the demo while we're here rather than hop back later. So I've got my soldering iron nice and hot here off screen. And I'm hoping this is going to show up on camera. I haven't checked. Yeah, okay, so you can see that. You see it's picking up just nice. So everything is working as expected. I had, just in case, a lighter. I figured, you know, if you can't see the fumes from the solder, you'd at least be able to see, you know, it pulling the flame all the way from there. That was my backup, just in case. As is, you could see the solder. And let me just clean off the tip really quick so it's not sitting there with solder cooking onto it. And hopefully I don't unplug my lights as I'm unplugging my soldering iron, because let's face it, I don't want a hot soldering iron hanging out over here while I'm... Yeah, there goes the lights. While I'm streaming. So, alright, now the soldering iron can start cooling down. One last thing, actually, I guess I'll mention. So, I do not, you will notice, have an on-off switch on this device. I frankly, so if I had a dedicated electronics table and this sat on the table day in and day out in exactly the same place, then I would consider an on-off switch. As it is, I just have my desk. I don't solder at my desk too often. So this will only come out when it's soldered, and in that case, it may as well just be plugged in. As you can see, I just have this on a couple of jumper wires, which is going to a little... Here, let me see if I can get this in shot for you. This is just a little 5 and 3.3 volt power supply board thingy for a breadboard. So one of those things, I got the 5 volts back here on my desk on a what do you call it, XT60 connector. A little awkward getting XT connector down to these smaller gauge wires, but it is doable. It's one of those things, just start out with a larger wire probably, and then just splice them together. And one of those things, I could put an on-off switch in line there. Again, it's largely not necessary. I don't feel like it is, so it's whenever I need this, I'm figuring I'm just going to... Alright, if I'm soldering then chances are I already have a breadboard with power supply out because I'm soldering for a project. So I don't see any situation in which I'm soldering and I don't already have access to a 5 volt supply right off a breadboard. So one of these deals. Do not think it's necessary to have a power on off switch for me specifically in my situation. You might want one, but you know, it is what it is. That is also the reason why this is actually just drilled out, because I wasn't actually sure what I was doing with it, whether or not I would go ahead and open it up and put a power switch on it. If I would perhaps put batteries on the inside, because I do have a little bit of space in here based on the geometry of getting stuff lofted up and fit. So I can fit more stuff on the inside if I want to, but at the end of the day, I decided, you know what, let's keep it simple. There's no real reason to add any bells and whistles to this. And this is what we ended up with. Again, a lot nicer than I expected it to be, than I was planning for it to be, but that's where we're at. So, let us hop over to Fusione, and here's the CAD. So, I started with the grill, as you can imagine, and spirals are kind of interesting. It's one of these things where, to get them right, takes a little bit of effort. Like, you can't just throw an arc in there and then circle it, extrude it around. You do have to set it up properly. So one of those things I just went with, as I found it, is called an Archimedes spiral. Evidently that's the name of it. But if I turn this fan off, you will see that it's just a matter of, I mean, as you might expect, you got a number of concentric circles. It arcs on each circle, and on each, the intersection of each arc is at a specific, you know, in theory, linearly placed axis. So you can see here I have 8 circles, I have 8 lines, everything's equal. It's one of those things. I'd have a slightly different shape if I changed any of these numbers up, but one of those things. I am what I'm most surprised about this is that this spline line is considered constrained. You know, spline lines normally, you know, it's one of those things, like, there's a lot you got to do to them in order to get them constrained normally. So for example, equal that, set this to, or actually let's make that collinear. It's not going to let me. Parallel then to that. Let's say parallel to that. And do this. I'm just trying to get an example of all the stuff that has to happen or for a to get constrained. I guess I'll make this collinear with that, or not collinear, quinkydink with that, and that quinkydink with that. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. My point being, the point of playing around with Fusion right here is that spline lines are like super difficult to get constrained, but evidently the shape, you know, once we get enough points on here, evidently Fusion's like, no, literally nothing you can do to it. Like, I would expect that I should, yeah, okay, so right there, that's what I expect. So this, in my opinion, is not constrained if it's, if I can mess with one of the variables by moving it, but evidently that's not what Fusion thinks. Evidently Fusion thinks that that's constrained as is. So anyway, that is where how I ended up putting that together. Another quick note is, obviously this says Noctua, F2, etc, etc, etc. I actually got a Corsair in the box. One of those things. I only really needed the hole placement. That's the only thing I needed the fan for. And the hole placement on 140mm fans I assumed was always exactly the same. It ended up being the same at least between my two 140mm fans, but one of those things. I imagine it's for everything else as well. And then I just took the dimensions off my fan and made sure they matched what the CAD was, rather than using dimensions directly, like outside dimensions, the overall size and depth of it. I just used those off my fan instead of making sure that the CAD was off of the model here, so I didn't have to worry about that. So with that out of the way, after there we go, for some reason was not moving around. After we got the grill done, then I had to start thinking about the inside. So turn these two off. Whoops. First off, obviously I needed some stuff to bolt into, to bolt the fan to, and that also, I realized afterwards, meant that I probably needed to make this thicker. So one of those things, 4mm bolts is what fit through there. 4mm bolt heads, socket heads I should say, are 3mm thick. So I started at 3mm. I had an extra 2mm for, you know, just the thickness of the wall behind it. So this ended up thicker than I expected it to. But frankly, it's okay. It makes the spiral itself a little bit more resilient, so I didn't mind it too much. So we got the bolts to go into the captured nuts. Derp. The captured nuts there. Next up, I needed to constrain this cartridge. I knew I was going to put the cartridge in there at this point, and I was like, all right, you know what? We're going to probably put a cartridge in there rather than put the just backed all the way up to it. And one of these deals where I had to make a decision on how this was getting printed, and obviously if we were capturing bolts on this, that made more sense than to print it laying down like this. So let me just burp, and I wanted to spin it, half spin it, not full spin it. There we go. And actually give me this. There we go. So printed like this makes sense, right? Which means that the back side of this needs to be lofted up, or I need supports. One of those things I prefer to have the loft there instead of supports. It is probably close to the same amount of material, but it it is what it is. It's a personal preference, frankly, because it's about the same amount of material, probably. So that, obviously, as you can see, it doesn't completely capture, like, it isn't pressed straight up against the side of the cartridge, right? If I take this away, if I turn this off, you can see that the cartridge is only has a slight, only has this much width to it. It's 2mm, or 3mm. I upped it to 3mm later on. But it's only 3mm on this wall right here, which means that we've only got this much of the face of it pressed up against that lip. And frankly, I decided that was alright. It's one of those things, it just needs a little bit. It's going to be in there pretty tight, I knew already. So it didn't need the full face to be completely covered, was my thinking. On the back side, I just put a little bit of a lip, as you can see here. It's just up to the height of this, which again was 3mm. and then 3mm around the edges, just like the walls are 3mm thick, just to match them. So that's all that was. And then obviously, as you saw before, the top part is just there to match this. So this ended up as this kind of hex shape. Not obviously not a normal hex, but regardless, because of this loft right here, because it's following the line of this loft, the top part ended up following the line of the loft, and therefore I just made the lid match it. Easy enough, easy enough. The next thing to talk about is these holders for the carbon, whatever you call it, the carbon filter. So these, I decided to go as simple as possible, so I just put the crossbars in there. But obviously, this does not want to print well in any orientation. I originally had these at 3mm thick. These are now 10mm thick. Even at 3mm thick, these crossbars, I printed it straight up and down exactly as you see it, right, or actually upside down, I should say. So this part was, this being the largest part, and the solid part was on the bed. So I printed it upside down so that this was on the bed. And it's one of those things, at 3mm thick, and actually that one was 3mm thick this direction, and 2mm thick on this face. Again, I upped the wall thicknesses all around later on, but at that thickness, it was just plain a torture test for my printer, and my printer, again, is not tuned to print PLA to begin with. So, one of those deals where I decided at first, okay, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and up this to 10 and these to 3 to try to make my printer print this acceptably. And I actually did print it, and we'll pop back over to the camera. So my printer did print this, and it frankly turned out decently. The problem was that, so if you look down here, one, we got this bridge right here along the bottom because it's printed like this. So this part was a bridge, right? I was trying to print without supports, which, as you can see along these sides, frankly turned out just fine. The the finish on the overhangs is really not that bad. Well, it's a little bad in this corner. Admittedly, a little bad in this corner. One day I'll get a better camera. But point being is that this, as you can see, yeah, actually you 100% can see that one, and maybe that one as well. It's one of these deals. It's printing up and down. It's got a rather narrow base, and everything's a little bit skinny. These walls right here look like they're still 2mm thick. I didn't up them to 3mm just yet. So it's one of these things where this did not print square enough to fit into the box. I already had the back case printed, and I could not fit, well, I just barely fit it, and I was like, there's no way this is coming back out if I jam it all the way into the case. So I reprinted it laying down like this, okay? And that's how this guy's printed. It printed well enough. It's a little sticky in there, but I'm not complaining. It got done, and it printed like this with full supports. The full supports were an absolute bear to get out of in between here. My PETG supports have not been that bad recently. One of those things, if this was printed in PETG, maybe they would still be as bad. Maybe it's just a matter of the supports being horribly placed in here, you know, in between these crossbars. But it's one of those things. I was trying to get the project done. The project was supposed to take like an hour to design because, again, originally I was just going to do the grill and bolt everything together. Ended up being like 4 hours, which was 4 hours that I did not spend on doing the coiler uncoiler project, doing the code for that stuff. One of those deals. I was trying to get a project to print because, again, as I mentioned in previous streams, I'm trying to keep my printer busy because my printer is always the thing slowing me down. That's why I tried to make this project. Figured I'd bang it out really quick. That way my printer had something to do. Ended up taking more time away from the coiler uncoiler programming than I wanted to. So at the end of the day, I put the supports in and just got it done. It got done. We got it printed. I'm happy. Now, the last thing I will say about this is while this was printing with supports, I entertained the notion of breaking this up, cutting it you know, basically somewhere in here, either definitely not halfway through, but along this plane, either along the top edge or the bottom edge, and somehow getting them pieced together, or possibly just cutting the top crossbeam out and then gluing in the top crossbeam at the end. That was a solution I thought of. That way, this whole entire piece prints without supports, minus, for example, the crossbeam, and then the crossbeam gets printed without supports, obviously flat on the bed, and then I come back and I glue one crossbeam in, or the top, you know, if I cut it right here, right above where the carbon filter is kept, you know, the top quote-unquote half, even though technically speaking it's not perfectly half, but you understand the idea. So I consider splitting this up. That may be a good idea in the future, but as is, it printed without supports, or it printed with supports rather, and it printed well enough to fit into here once it had the supports. It was not out of square. It did not have any defects along the edges that prevented it to get in there. So one of those deals, we got there in the end. And I just realized, that's fascinating. This is the first time I've had my camera off center. Good deal. Oh, I hit the wrong button. Where is Fusion? My bad. Alright, so there's where we're at. Obviously, I mentioned I printed this in 2 pieces. So there is the handle. Got these little slots that it keys into. We turn the handle off. You can see that back to lofting it up, you know, for printing. So obviously this shape wants to be printed straight up and down like this. Let me turn the back segment off, and then we can do this and rotate like this. So this is how the shape wants to print. Obviously I have this overhang right here. I decided I'm willing to put supports in that area. That's what my concession will be. Or actually, this should be like this. There we go. I'm willing to put supports in this area. That's no big deal. And then otherwise, again, we just loft these guys up to allow them to print without supports. So that is that. And then, again, finally, this little slot guy right here. Now, this bolt, actually, the bolt that holds this guy down needs to be like exactly the thickness of the wall thickness plus the latch. So from here, it needs to stop more or less right here, because as you can see, and I didn't notice this until after I printed, right here is where my fan stops, and as you can probably tell, that means that the bolt is literally above the fan. Now the fan does have a slight recess, however in the center, that recess in between the front and the back, it has a slight recess between the front and the back, but the center part where the fan is comes right up to the top edge, and this being centered on it means that it's right at the highest part of the fan. So, like I said, the bolt needs to be as small as possible, unfortunately. I think because of the geometry of this, I'd have to look at the sketch again. Let's see if we can find it. Latch, there we go. Okay, so this that's interesting. This got unconstrained. As you know, I like to keep my sketches constrained, but point being, something went off here. Okay, it looks like I probably made a change, and this went from being collinear right here, is probably what happened. So that used to be collinear is my assumption, and I made some kind of change which knocked that off. Point being, let's see. I opened this up to see what I could see. I see. So, if that's the bolt hole, this is all the way forwards. So if this is all the way forwards and I move the bolt hole up, let's say 10 millimeters. Yeah. So my total span right here is 15. I just got to make sure that this is less than 15, I believe. So that's 15. Is it to center? I think it's minus the diameter, the 4 millimeter diameter. So if that's minus the 4 millimeter diameter, then we would be safe moving this up 10 millimeters. And if I hit the finish button, oh, turn the body back on. There we go. Let's see. Where's my hole at? Oh, finish sketch. There we go. Yeah, okay. So in that case, that looks like it would fit. And if I drag this back, okay, there we go. So it does not look like that would clear at 10 millimeters, but I do think I have a little bit more, so I can back that up to 8 millimeters in theory, and we should be fine. So looks like that is fixable. One of those things. I have my print of it, so I didn't bother going back and fixing it, changing that, making that change, because I won't be printing another copy of this ever, probably. So that is the CAD. That was how the design went. Again, this should have been a full stream by itself. As it turns out, I ended up putting more effort into this than I expected, but that's not what happened. So one of those things. Whoops. Again, the idea of a fume extractor, frankly, is very simple, and I did not really expect it to be that. If you asked me, okay, do you think you can stream this fume extractor? I would have said, nah, it's too stupid, it's too simple. It's, I don't have any ideas off the top of my head. Well, one of those things, I sat down and I was percolating as I was getting everything lined up, and I came up with some ideas, and it turned out being reasonably interesting. So what am I going to do? One of those things moving forwards, I could try. Well, see, nah, I don't really want to, though. I have enough designs in the work, well, not designs, but project ideas written down right now, that I don't feel like I'm stretching for anything not interesting, and anything that could potentially bomb, basically, is what I'm trying to say. I don't think I need to take a risk on anything right now, so I don't think I will take any risks with the projects. And if another project like this comes up where I'm just like, no, it's going to be a stupid design, I'm going to be done in 10 minutes, etc., 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 I don't think I'm going to double guess myself and say, well, the fume extractor came out good, came out interesting. Nah. Again, too much work to do, so probably not going to take this as learning experience. Probably going to let it just be a one-off and assume that it was an aberration. Otherwise, that is the conclusion of this video. Thank you guys for watching. For the other projects, let's see. So as I mentioned, I've been working on the code for the the coiler uncoiler. That is, so the code is 90% written. I've got like one more function that actually does stuff, and then I just got to write menus, and we should be good. I'm pretty sure I already did like the code that runs the menus. I got all that straightened out first. The one thing that I had mentioned in previous streams that it was supposed to be the simple coiler decoiler. That was the title of the stream. And I decided I wanted to try to do something. Well, the thing I was trying to do was I was trying to create my own menu class. I took a quick look at different menu class options that people have written for Arduino devices, and none of them I found particularly interesting or useful. I wanted to try to implement my own. The problem is that I do not know enough C. So the biggest issue was that what I really wanted in a menu class is I wanted an object that had display text and a callback, frankly, is the two things that I wanted. And I tried, and I had some serious difficulty trying to implement a class that had a function as an attribute. And it's one of those things, I'm 99% sure that it's, doable. It's just, again, C. It's C. I don't program in C really much at all. I program a lot in Python and a lot in JavaScript, and that's about it. So, I can get by in C doing the basic stuff. And after about 2 days of trying to sort that out, putting an honest effort into trying to make that work, it was one of those things. It was 2 days, and we're trying to get the project done, so you just got to know when to call it. So the project now does not have custom menus. However, I am decently happy with how I am handling the menus right now. It doesn't feel nearly as clunky as I was concerned that it would be. I did come up with a decent solution. So again, I just have one more function that actually does something, and then I just go to basically program in strings. It basically is all I've got to do. After that, just program in some strings, and then the code will be done, and then it's a matter of testing and debugging the code, and then we will go ahead and share that all on stream. And that has been the sum total. Well, that and this obviously has been the sum total of everything I've been working on. The physical body of the coiler decoiler, I did make a minor adjustment to. You probably can't tell, but here, let me spread this out just so that it looks like the CAD. One of those things without anything on it, it has a tendency to collapse, but I made a minor adjustment to this guy right here just to get it working because it was a little small. I made it a little bit larger. Otherwise, it works just fine. And I've got to look at the encoder. Here, let me just grab it. I got to take a look at this guy just because, well, first off, I put this plate on upside down. Don't laugh, okay? I was just banging it together really quick because I was trying to get it off my desk. And then I realized, oh crap, I put that upside down when I tried to put the spring assembly in the top. Again, I gotta take a quick look at this because I think something's off on here. Well, there's basically two things that I think is off. One, somehow this is scraping, which, again, I based this model on another model that I used and worked perfectly okay. So I'm actually a bit surprised that this is scraping right now. So all that should be is reprinting these guys and then maybe padding out the spring assembly with a couple washers just to give myself a little bit extra space. I mean, I could put washers down here too. You know, one of those things. No need necessarily to waste the plastic, but these prints are so small that I figured I'd just reprint these guys, whereas the spring assembly is a little bit more plastic. So, again, I did not spend much, if any, time on that. I just really quick threw some bolts into it just to make sure that it worked. And that was done quick. And then I did have a 5/16 rod in this guy. And it did work. No problems. This top guy was not well, one of those things. I did not have it really loaded up. I just kind of put this on here. So technically it should have a hair more weight. But as far as I could tell, did not have a problem. I did realize, however, two things. One, this board was designed for the previous layout, and therefore these holes are slightly different. Now, that is not necessarily a problem because these holes are for the plastic, and so long as I put a washer underneath it, well, it's one of those things. The washer is going to be a little bit annoying just because, as you can see, I got wires in the way. So I'm between basically desoldering these buttons and then putting them in another one, or getting this to work in a way, basically put standoffs on this guy, plus a little bit of washer possibly, and then just having it sit on there. I'm still one of those things, again, have not spent any time really working on this, and therefore we do not have a concrete decision. I just know it needs to be fixed because these holes are not exactly where they were before. And, well, I mean, they're close. I'll give you credit. They're close. They're just not perfectly in line. And this does need standoffs for this guy to sit on, because unlike this guy where the standoffs are on the top piece because the keys push through the top, this one, the keys are mounted on top instead of being pushed through. So this design needs to be changed a little bit. So that is where we're at with the other projects. Again, have not spent much of any time at all working on them, so do not have solutions for those guys, but hopefully by the weekend, coiler uncoiler will be done. And otherwise, today is Thursday. I've been working on the coiler uncoiler code 90% of the time, and the other, well, 75% of the time, and the other 25% of the time was this guy. You know, outside of, obviously, I have other things to do in real life that take up time, but besides that, point being is, as you probably noticed if you were watching this live, I do have a D&D prep session scheduled for right after this stream, and that is because today's Thursday, tomorrow's Friday, which is D&D day, and my party, as you may recall me mentioning, went a bit off the rails, which means that the guild, which we designed last prep session, that is now out the window until further notice. I need to create a whole new encounter because the guild is out the window. So, that is fun. I'm sitting here, and it's one of those things. Obviously, I've already scheduled the design stream. Part of me is still trying to figure out whether or not I can just justify using the guild anyway. It's one of these deals where the guild is set for their level. Like, I designed it for their level. The problem is that they, in theory, will be higher level after the new replacement, so I'll need to go back and update the guild, which is a little bit annoying. So if I could just use the guild, but from a story perspective, I don't know that I actually can. I think I actually need to come up with a new intermediate adventure between Fort Vallis and the guild, those two adventures, which are the last two that we've done prep sessions for. And therefore tonight we will be doing another prep session that we have to get done, if possible, in one single sitting tonight, which means that I may be up a bit late. The alternative is tomorrow. Tomorrow I have with my family stuff to do up until D&D, I'm pretty sure. But if I have an hour or so to use tomorrow, that may help. I just don't know that I do, is the biggest problem. So since I don't know whether or not I have that hour tomorrow morning, hour or two tomorrow night, we're gonna have to try to get it all done tonight. So not really looking forward to this, but it's where we're at right now. So let's see. Yep, that should have us caught all up. So if you're interested in D&D prep coming up in a little while, let's see, what time is it right now? So in about 20 minutes is when I have scheduled. I have it scheduled for 8 o'clock. And that's fine because I need to get myself some more coffee. So if you're available at 8 o'clock and want to hang out while I design some D&D stuff off the top of my head, because obviously I have not spent any time at all figuring out what I'm doing, that should be fun. So, yep, that is my 20-minute outro. Good, polished, about acceptable size. I mean, maybe we could have lengthened the outro a little bit, but I think you'll forgive me for cutting it a bit short of 20 minutes. Otherwise, I have a D&D stream to prep for, so if you are not joining us, then allow me to say right now, I hope you have a great and wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at in the world,